i.e., skating and doing things that I had not, done on stage up until this point, to be able to share that with the world.
The glory of Usher once shone so brightly, it seemed to overshadow the entire R&B sky. At 47, that light began to tremble. And as it faded, the shattered pieces of his life surfaced one by one. A childhood sacrificed, a loneliness no one understood, a marriage collapsing, family losses, and the crushing pressure of fame that weighed on him for 3 decades. The man who once set the stage ablaze with "Yeah" found himself pulled under by his own storms that had never been fully told. This is no longer the story of a superstar. This is the tragedy of a man. But what at age 47 has made Usher's tragedy so brutally suffocating? The beginning of the break. No one truly sees where a tragedy begins. For Usher Raymond IV, it was not the moment the stage lights dimmed, nor a shocking scandal, nor a loud romance splashed across headlines. It started with something quieter. A small house in Dallas, in the fall of 1978, where a baby was born, without knowing that not long after his family would split in two. When Usher was just over a year old, his father, Usher Raymond III, left home and never came back. There was no dramatic farewell, no explanation. One day he simply disappeared from the dinner table, from the house, from the life of a child who hadn't yet learned to say "Dad" clearly. From that moment, his mother Jonetta Patton had to shoulder all responsibilities in a life of financial strain. And from that moment, an invisible void began to settle into Usher's heart. A void that years later, no matter how famous or wealthy he became, he could never fill. Usher's childhood lacked no love, but it lacked presence. No man held his hand. No one stood on the sidelines of his games. No one sat in the front row of his first performance at church. As he grew older, Usher began to notice his mother's silence whenever people asked about his father. And to a child, that silence hurts more than an answer. During his early years, Usher moved with his family to Chattanooga, Tennessee, where his mother had lived before. It was a poor, turbulent neighborhood, but rich in music. This was where Jonetta placed her son into the choir at St. Elmo Baptist Church. Usher was around 9. In a room filled with organs and the clapping of the congregation, the boy's voice, soft, bright, natural, was quickly noticed. Adults began whispering to his mother, "That boy has talent. Don't waste it." But that attention was both a gift and a weight. Once labeled the child with the special voice, Usher had to do what other kids his age didn't: hours of practice performances at church events, learning to behave properly in front of adults, learning to smile when asked. Small expectations slowly turned into a heavy burden he couldn't refuse, because for his mother, it was the only chance for her son to escape poverty. When Usher turned 10, his mother realized Chattanooga was too small for his dream. She made a bold decision, moving the family to Atlanta, the rising capital of R&B and hip-hop, home to major record labels. It was a turning point that shifted the direction of Usher's entire childhood. Atlanta in the late 80s and early 90s was vibrant, flashy, and full of opportunity, but also risky for a 12-year-old. Jonetta Patton, driven by the instincts of a woman who had endured loss, became extremely strict, managing his schedule, monitoring his friends, supervising his sleep, schoolwork, and practice hours. She didn't just want her son to succeed. She feared poverty would swallow his future if she relaxed even for a day. And so young Usher grew up between two opposing lines. One side was childhood, running around sports cartoons, carefree afternoons meant for kids. The other was rehearsal studios, the critical eyes of producers, advice from unfamiliar adults, and questions like, "Do you want to be a star?" At 12, he wasn't old enough to understand what being a star meant, but he was smart enough to understand what his mother expected. The defining turning point came at age 13 when Usher joined the teen group New Beginning. It was his first exposure to a semi-professional music environment: scheduled rehearsals, basic choreography demo, recording trial performances, producer meetings, contracts. He was the youngest member yet the most pressured, because everyone knew he was the one with the most potential. For the first time, Usher felt the very real possibility of being replaceable, if he wasn't perfect. That feeling followed him for years, shaping the fierce competitiveness he carried onto every stage. The peak and the first cracks. At 13, Usher appeared on Star Search, where he drew so much attention that L.A. Reid immediately signed him for development. It was the stepping stone that brought him into Layface Records, one of the biggest R&B empires of the 1990s. But the stage lights came with challenges. During the recording of his debut album in 1994, Usher's voice changed drastically due to puberty. Layface even paused the project to wait for him to stabilize. A boy barely entering adolescence suddenly faced a singer's greatest fear: losing control of his own body. To keep him on track, Reed sent Usher to New York to live under the mentorship of Sean Puffy Combs. The environment instilled discipline and professional performance instincts, but also pushed him into an adult pace far too soon. Overnight studio sessions, dance rehearsals, media training, learning how to be new, yet commercial. This chapter, rarely discussed in interviews, became the foundation of Usher's stage presence, while planting the first seeds of the pressure he would carry throughout his career. In 1997, with the release of My Way, Usher shed the image of a boy and became a true phenomenon. The album sold more than 7 million copies, placing him among the most successful young artists in R&B history. You Make Me Wanna topped international charts. Nice and Slow became his first Billboard Hot 100 #1 hit. Beyond music, Usher's fashion leather jackets, baggy pants, a half smile spread nationwide as a trend. He became the face of a new R&B generation, seductive, confident, full of promise. At the same time, Usher stepped into acting, appearing in The Faculty 1998 and TV shows like Moshe. Though not major roles, Hollywood opening its doors to a 19-year-old R&B singer showed his rare influence. Record labels often described him as the voice of Donny Hathaway, the dance of Michael Jackson, and the market pull of Bobby Brown. His biggest success, however, arrived in 2001 with 8701. The songs You Remind Me and You Got It Bad both hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, earning Usher his first 2 Grammys. The album sold over 4 million copies in the US and more than 8 million worldwide. At 23, he wasn't just competing with R&B peers. He stood alongside pop icons. His world tour was even sponsored by high-fashion brands, a rarity for such a young artist. But everything before that was merely the runway for the moment that would redefine his entire career. Confessions 2004. No other album of his, and almost none from the decade, made an impact as massive. Selling 20 million copies worldwide, it became a cornerstone of contemporary R&B. Yeah, ruled Billboard for 12 consecutive weeks. Burn Confessions. Part 2 and My Boo took turns dominating the top spots. Usher became the first artist to score 3 #1 singles from the same album within just months. He entered the league of the best-selling artists on the planet, standing alongside Eminem, Beyoncé, and Alicia Keys as figures who shaped early 2000s pop culture. But from this peak, the first cracks appeared. Confessions became too big. It cast an enormous shadow, forcing every future project of his into comparison. The label wanted him to repeat the miracle. The public expected him to create new musical landmarks. Every show had to be flawless, every move razor sharp. Behind the scenes, Usher constantly had to prove he wasn't just an R&B star, he had to be a game changer. The pressure intensified as he took on endorsements, brand collaborations, TV shows, and a coaching role on The Voice. Everything required constant presence, no mistakes, no slow breaths. Just as his career reached its brightest point, his personal life fell into turbulence. His long-term relationship with Chili TLC ended, a highly publicized moment in pop culture. Rumors, speculation, behind-the-scenes stories. All of it turned his private life into tabloid material for the first time. This was when he lost the privacy he had held tightly since his teenage years. Then he reached a milestone. Many artists chased their entire lives being regarded as the spiritual heir to Michael Jackson. The praise was an honor, but also a burden, because behind it loomed the silent question: where could he go next? Had his peak arrived too early? Behind the blinding light of Confessions, beneath the perfectly pressed suits, was an Usher, struggling to balance success expectations and an unspoken fear. Once you're at the top, people stop cheering for you to climb. They wait for you to fall. And this was only the beginning of the storms that would shape the rest of his journey. Love shattered when darkness closed. In Usher's career lifted him to the peak of brilliance, but that very light exposed the cracks in his personal life, cracks he could never fully hide. On stage, he was an artist who could command every beat, every breath. But offstage, things began slipping out of his grasp in ways no one expected. In 2007, Usher married stylist Tameka Foster. For him, it was a decision to anchor himself after years of spinning in the whirlwind of fame. But only weeks after the wedding turmoil began to surface, the public fiercely objected, social media questioned everything. The press dissected every detail. The backlash wasn't only aimed at Tameka, it struck at Usher himself, forcing him to choose between his family and his public image. The deepest fracture came from the very home where he once found peace. His mother, Jonetta Patton, who had guided him since he was 13, opposed the relationship. The two argued endlessly, and it ended with a decision that cost them both. Usher fired his mother from her role as manager. That moment severed one of the most important bonds in his life. In choosing love, he lost the foundation that had always held him steady. But marriage did not bring the calm he had hoped for. After their two sons were born, conflicts over lifestyle responsibility and trust grew heavier. And just as they were struggling through their crisis, an unimaginable tragedy struck Tameka's son. 11-year-old Kyla Glover was severely injured in a jet ski accident on Lake Lanier. Usher rushed to the hospital in despair. For weeks, he stayed by the boy's bedside, holding the hand of a child he loved as his own, praying for a miracle. But the miracle never came. Kyla passed away quietly, leaving a void that would never be filled in Usher's heart. He nearly fell apart, yet even his grief was misunderstood by the public, with many accusing him of not attending the funeral. In reality, he was there standing in the back, away from cameras, trying to protect the family's peace amid the storm of scrutiny. The tragedy didn't stop. After the divorce, Usher and Tameka entered a bitter custody battle. In court, he cried as he spoke about fatherhood, the fear of losing his children, and the guilt over things that had spiraled out of control. He was eventually granted primary custody, but the victory cast a long shadow. Behind it lay a broken family and wounds that had not yet healed. A year later, fate struck again. His son, Usher Raymond V, known as Cinco, almost drowned in the pool at home. He survived after being pulled out in time, but the shock left Usher haunted the fear of losing a child, the fear of tragedy repeating itself, the fear of failing to protect the people he loved. In the years that followed, Usher tried rebuilding his life and seeking new emotional ground. He married Grace Miguel in 2015, but his second marriage did not last either. They separated in 2018 with calm and mutual respect, yet the ending underscored an uncomfortable truth: Usher could write timeless love songs, but he often found himself lost among the fragments of his own relationships. Alongside romantic turmoil, Usher faced heavier responsibilities as a father. Cinco, his eldest, was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at a young age. The entire family had to relearn how to live, how to care for him, and how to adjust to a new reality. Usher shared that it was a deeply challenging journey, requiring patience, unity, and constant presence as a father. When things finally settled, he welcomed 2 more children with his girlfriend, Jen Goycochea. Sovereign Beau and Sire opened a new chapter, quieter, steadier, and more mature. But looking back, Usher's love life was never the smooth, slow jam ballad he sang so effortlessly. It was a string of losses, abrupt separations, long nights alone in a big house wondering why someone who had everything kept losing the things that mattered most. A father-son tragedy shattered amid the turmoil of his collapsing marriage with Tameka Foster. And as his closest relationships grew so fragile that even the slightest blow could break them, Usher suddenly faced a trial no one could ever be prepared for. It wasn't a media feud, nor a tabloid rumor. It was something quiet, private, and the most painful of all: his biological father was dying. Usher Raymond III, the man who had disappeared from his life before he could even say the word dad, was admitted to intensive care in 2008. He needed an emergency liver transplant. There was no reunion, no years of healing, no chance for father and son to speak to each other as grown men, only a cold hospital bed and a life-or-death decision placed in Usher's hands. It was a cruel paradox. The father, almost entirely absent from his childhood, now depended on him for survival. Usher hesitated for a long time, torn between old wounds and a blood bond that lingered quietly, no matter how much he tried to deny it. He questioned whether he was saving his father or saving the child he once was, the one who never received a single embrace from that man. In the end, guided by the sincere advice of Nellie, a close friend who understood the void inside him, Usher chose compassion. He paid for all medical expenses, hoping the surgery might become the late beginning of a new chapter between father and son. But fate closed the story with a brutal arc. During the operation, his father fell into a deep coma. Doctors tried their best, but the tiny thread of hope lasted only a few days. When they informed him that life support would soon be withdrawn, Usher stood in the hallway, not as a global superstar, but as a son who never had the chance to love, nor to be fully loved. He looked at the closed door of the hospital room, feeling the same emptiness that had stretched across 3 decades now, sealed by absolute silence. And then life delivered another blow so sharp no one could imagine it. At the exact moment his father was preparing to leave this world, on the other side of town, Usher's newborn son let out his first cry. One life beginning, one life ending. 2 opposing moments happening on the same day, imprinting on Usher a suffocating paradox: he became a father on the very day he lost his own. It wasn't just a shock. It was the tragedy of an unfinished lineage where love always arrived at the wrong time, in the wrong way, and never whole. And at that moment, before his mind could heal, and before grief could settle, Usher entered a new phase of life scandals crashing in, like storms tearing into old wounds and exposing entirely new ones, louder, harsher, and far more public wounds that no spotlight could hide and no fame could save him from. Scandal, the long slide, as his reputation suddenly collapsed. By 2017, a series of unexpected events caused the public image once considered the safest in R&B to flip almost entirely within a matter of months. The story began with reports in the US media alleging that around 2012, Usher had been involved in a civil lawsuit related to disputes in his personal life, said to have ended in a settlement of about $1.1 million. Though he never confirmed the details, the appearance of legal documents was enough to drag past issues back into the spotlight. By the summer of 2017, the situation escalated when 3 individuals filed new lawsuits represented by a high-profile attorney known for handling celebrity cases. They accused Usher of failing to disclose personal information prior to intimate relations and sought multi-million-dollar compensation. At that point, the scandal moved beyond legal boundaries and became a topic the media exploited to the fullest. Within days, his name flooded newspapers, TV news segments, and especially social media. Despite no legal conclusions, technical terms from the lawsuits were reinterpreted, cut apart, and spread widely, leaving the public with a distorted version of the story. Social media became a brutal accelerator. Hashtags, memes, commentary videos, and talk shows. Using his name as a punchline turned him into a global topic of discussion. While the media front exploded, another front became just as heavy: finances. Civil lawsuits continued to be filed, some demanding up to $20 million in damages, causing legal fees, negotiations, and documentation costs to rise sharply each month. One of the largest cases was withdrawn in 2019 after a private settlement. Although details were undisclosed, handling multiple cases simultaneously created clear financial and public image pressure. At this time, Usher's music career was already entering a challenging phase. Before the scandal erupted, he had released Hard to Love 2016. The album debuted at number 5 on the Billboard 200 with around 38,000 units sold in its first week, a reasonable figure for the market then, but a significant drop compared to Confessions. 2 years later, he released A 2018, an experimental trap R&B project. It peaked at number 31 on the Billboard 200 with roughly 15,000 first-week units. Many critics felt the album lacked cohesion and failed to make a clear impact. While it is impossible to say the decline was entirely caused by the scandal, the timing is difficult to ignore. As artists of his generation rebranded aggressively, Usher found himself pulled into press conferences, lawsuits, and legal analyses, drawing public attention away from his music and toward everything surrounding it. The most visible consequence of scandal often doesn't appear in press releases, but in the silence of partners. Some endorsement contracts were not renewed. Several brand campaigns planned earlier in the year were paused or replaced with different ambassadors. Younger artists, typically very sensitive to image risks, became more cautious about collaborating with him. Usher's name, once a guarantee in the R&B market, was visibly affected. In his personal life, the impact became tangible as well. In March 2018, Usher and his wife Grace Miguel announced their separation after nearly a decade together. By late 2018, they finalized their divorce. Neither side cited the scandal as a direct cause, but a marriage ending amid relentless media pressure undoubtedly added strain to everyone involved. Even so, Usher kept working. He continued performing, producing music, appearing on television, and sustaining the Usher's New Look Foundation, a nonprofit he founded in 1999 to help underprivileged youth develop leadership skills. Philanthropy remained the most consistent factor maintaining his positive public image through the turmoil. From the outside, Usher's career did not collapse in an absolute sense. He didn't go bankrupt, wasn't banned from performing, and didn't vanish from the industry. But from 2017 to 2020, he no longer held the irreplaceable status he once had during 8701 or Confessions. Every new project faced the lingering shadow effect of the scandal audiences, and media revisited the old story before looking at his new work. At his peak, Usher sold more than 75 million records, won 8 Grammys, earned dozens of Billboard hits, and was regarded as one of the greatest R&B icons of the early 21st century. But after 2017, all those achievements came with a layer of invisible doubt, something every artist understands is nearly impossible to erase completely. The scandal didn't erase Usher's talent, but it forced him into a different orbit, one where every step had to be calculated, every release had to surpass the past, and every public appearance required time to rebuild trust. And that was the scandal's biggest impact, not the financial losses, but the direction his career was forced to take, amid noise that had nothing to do with music. Age 47, rebirth in the cracks of glory. Turning 47 is always a sensitive milestone for an artist who rose in the 90s. For Usher, it was more than just a number. It was a test of endurance, of vocal strength, of survival in an industry notoriously unforgiving toward age, especially for someone once seen as the model of the perfect star-stage-burning choreography, a distinctive voice, a youthful aura beyond his years. But time has its own way of working. After turning 40, Usher had to adjust everything: his training routines, his breath control, his energy distribution, to ensure his performances still carried momentum. Choreographers who worked with him said his practice schedule remained as intense as when he was 25, but recovery took longer now, and each show required days of mandatory rest. His voice, his strongest weapon, had to shift techniques to fit a more mature tone, no longer relying on rapid-fire high notes like in the 8701 era. Instead of avoiding reality, Usher faced it. And then came the Las Vegas residency, the turning point. In 2021, he launched a fixed series of shows in Las Vegas, a stage reserved for artists who have proven endurance and the ability to pull crowds consistently. In just over a year, more than 100 shows sold out. Every night the venue was packed with VIP sections, often filled with Hollywood stars. People came to see whether a 40-something Usher could still embody the king of R&B performer spirit. And the answer, based on ticket sales, audience reactions, and viral clips viewed millions of times, was yes. Stable live vocals, streamlined yet effective choreography, updated arrangements reflecting modern tastes, all helped Usher transition into a new era, proving the resilience of someone who survived the storms. Then came the 2024 Super Bowl halftime show, the biggest stage in America. Only 13 minutes, yet 13 minutes that redefined a legacy. When Usher appeared in an all-white outfit, mic in hand, striding across the rotating platform, audiences knew he was no longer running from the shadow of his past. He was stepping into it and reclaiming what had once been questioned. The Super Bowl triggered a global media explosion, pushing his old hits back onto the charts and reigniting interest among Gen Z, many of whom only knew him from TikTok. But behind the lights, another battlefield remained family. Usher is a father of 4, 2 sons, with ex-wife Tamika Foster, and 2 younger children with his current partner, Jennifer Goycochea. Fatherhood at nearly 50 is no simple task. A packed performance schedule, constant travel, business commitments, everything forced him to balance career and family. In recent interviews, he emphasized that his top priority will always be my kids, saying that the turbulent 2010s taught him the true value of being a present father. And then came another challenge, a crisis of artistic identity, a hurdle many veteran musicians eventually face. Usher was born in the age of CDs, MTV, and radio. But today's music industry belongs to streaming platforms, algorithms, 7-second viral clips, and rapidly shifting tastes. A new generation emerged with a different approach to R&B, forcing established artists to choose chase trends or cling to their old identity. Usher chose a third path, reconstructing himself. He rebuilt his image more mature, more refined, less focused on physical display, more rooted in experience. He invested in business ventures, beverages, restaurants, streetwear, entertainment technology, real estate. He collaborated with young artists to connect with new audiences, while retaining the traditional R&B essence that made him a star in 1997. At 47, he is no longer the MTV dancer with explosive moves, nor the invincible figure of the Confessions era. But he now has something young artists cannot possess: a legacy. A legacy of more than 75 million records sold, 8 Grammys, dozens of Billboard hits, an R&B aesthetic influenced by Michael Jackson, yet uniquely his own, and over 25 years among the top tier of artists. That legacy is his foundation. But it is also a source of immense pressure. He must preserve the image he built over half a lifetime, while adapting to a new market, a task more difficult than any choreography he has ever performed. And that is why his journey at 47 is not just a comeback. It is a rebirth, a renewed step into the center of change, another confrontation with time, another chance to prove that after all the scandal-lost lawsuits and doubt, he can still stand on the greatest stages of his life. With Sold Out Las Vegas shows a triumphant Super Bowl, expanding business ventures, a strengthened role as a father, and continuous efforts to reinvent himself. Usher at 47 is not merely surviving. He is rewriting his own story. A man who once stood at the very top, who once fell to the deepest depths, and then rose again, not to reclaim a throne, but to prove he still has the strength to keep singing the story of his own life. And if tragedy is an inseparable part of Usher's journey, then resilience is what turned him into a legend. Because sometimes the ones who reach true greatness are not the luckiest, but the ones who dare to rise the most times, even when their hearts have already broken more than once.
All data, analysis, and commentary in this video are presented based on information available at the time of production. The content is subject to change over time and should not be considered a definitive forecast. There is still so much more to explore: stories of resilience, legacy, and truth. Feel free to dive into some of our top recommended videos now appearing on your screen.